In Apocalypse 17:6, when St. John explains his vision of the whore of Babylon, the woman who sits upon the city of seven mountains, clothed in purple and scarlet, he says this, quote, "When I saw her, I wondered with great wonder." The word he uses in Greek to express how he wondered is from the verb thaumazo, meaning I wonder or marvel. In Apocalypse chapter 13, when St. John describes the beast out of the sea and the Antichrist, that is, the head or king of the beast who is wounded and then has his image venerated, he uses the same verb. Apocalypse 13:3, quote, "One of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth wondered as they followed the beast." End quote. Is there a reason that St. John uses the same verb to describe how he wondered at the whore of Babylon, and how the people wondered at the Antichrist, the head or king of the beast who was wounded, and then has his image venerated? Yes, he uses the same verb to describe the wonder at both, because the beast and the whore of Babylon are part of one and the same entity. To wonder at one is to wonder at the other. In fact, immediately after St. John wondered at the whore of Babylon with great wonder, in the very next verse we read this, quote, "But the angel said to me, 'Why do you wonder? I will tell you the mystery of the woman and of the beast, with 7 heads and 10 horns that carries her." End quote. Notice, when the angel explains the mystery of the whore, he's also explaining the mystery of the beast. One and the same explanation covers the woman and the beast with 7 heads, because the beast carries her. She sits on top of it. The woman and the beast are part of the same mystery because they are part of the same entity. As we explained in our video, Is the World About to End? And as will be further demonstrated in this video. What this means is that if you've identified the whore of Babylon, then you've identified the beast out of the sea with 7 heads and the Antichrist, the head of the beast who is wounded. You cannot say that the deception of the whore of Babylon exists in one century, period, or area, but that the deception of the Antichrist and the beast out of the sea comes along in a different century, period, or area. No, if one is there, then the other must be present, because the whore sits on top of the beast. Likewise, you cannot say that the whore of Babylon is a religious deception which arises in Rome, without also saying that the deception of the Antichrist and the beast out of the sea is intimately connected to what's occurring in Rome and with the whore of Babylon. If you've identified the deception of one, then you've identified the deception of the other, both in time period and location, because the whore of Babylon sits on top of the beast out of the sea. So, what is the whore of Babylon? It is not the Catholic Church, as the Protestants wrongly say. As the points we just covered show, anyone who thinks that the Catholic Church is the whore of Babylon must say that the deception of the Antichrist has been present for all of Catholic history, because the explanation of the whore is the explanation of the beast, and the whore sits on top of the beast. But that is of course false. The whore of Babylon is not the Catholic Church. The Catholic Church is the one true church founded by Jesus Christ. The whore of Babylon is, rather, the end times counterfeit Catholic Church, as our video Is the World About to End demonstrates in detail. The whore of Babylon is the false bride, the counter-church which arises in the last days when the city of 7 hills, the city of Rome, not the Catholic Church itself, is overtaken by anti-popes and falls into apostasy from the true Catholic faith. As Our Lady of La Salette prophesied on September 19, 1846, quote, "Rome will lose the faith and become the seat of the Antichrist. The Church will be in eclipse." End quote. The whore is thus clothed in the colors of the bride, but she is not the bride. The whore of Babylon is the Vatican II sect that's currently occupying Rome and leading people into apostasy from the Catholic faith. The whore's apostasy and spiritual fornication, which has led almost the entire world astray, has indeed reduced the true Catholic Church to a faithful remnant in the final days, just as Jesus prophesied about the end times in Luke 18:8. Now, the whore of Babylon, the counter-church in Rome, sits on top of the beast out of the sea because the beast out of the sea is a new version of the pagan Roman Empire. This new version of the pagan Roman Empire is manifested politically in the European Union, and it is manifested spiritually or religiously in the Vatican II sect. And Rome's apostasy from the Catholic faith, enabled and led by the kings of the Vatican city-state in Rome, was the primary factor in how this new version of the pagan Roman Empire was able to form in Europe. Rome is therefore the spiritual capital of the beast out of the sea. What happened in Rome is why the beast out of the sea was able to form. That's why the whore sits on top of the beast. And that's why the explanation of the whore is part of the explanation of the beast. The fact that St. John's prophecy concerns the formation of a new version of the pagan Roman Empire in the final days, as a consequence of Europe's apostasy from Christ, is precisely why St. John's description of the woman on the beast fits exactly with the image of the woman Europa in Greek mythology. St. John's prophecy is about Europa or Europe in the final days in its political and religious dimensions. The fact that the end times beast out of the sea, described in chapters 13 and 17 of the Apocalypse, is a new version of the pagan Roman Empire, is precisely why Apocalypse 17:8 says that the beast out of the sea is a beast that was and is not. In Scripture, beasts out of the sea are empires that arise on the Mediterranean Sea. We learn that from the prophecies of Daniel. The pagan Roman Empire was the beast on the sea in St. John's day. It is the beast that was. It persecuted the faithful. It caused many to deny the faith, embrace idolatry, and worship false gods. However, the pagan Roman Empire beast was replaced by Christian Europe. Hence, the beast that was ceased to be. That means that prior to the rise of the end times beast out of the sea, the pagan Roman Empire, the beast that was, is not, because Christian Europe had replaced it. In the final days, however, Christian Europe will apostatize from Christ and return to paganism as a consequence of following the apostasy and whoredom of the city of Rome. This will result in the rise of a new pagan empire in Europe on the Mediterranean Sea. The beast that was and is not shall return. That's what St. John's prophecy in chapters 13 and 17 of the Apocalypse is about, and it has been fulfilled before our very eyes, as we will see. This video will not cover the many different ways in which Europa, both politically and religiously, fulfills the various prophecies about the beast out of the sea and the whore of Babylon sitting on top of it. See the video, Is the World About to End, for all of that information. Rather, this video will focus on perhaps the single most important way in which Europa represents the new version of the pagan Roman Empire and indeed fulfills the prophecies in the Apocalypse about the beast. We will focus on the beast's imposition of idolatry and the worship of false gods. As we cover these facts, keep in mind that from the standpoint of the faith, the most important feature of the pagan Roman Empire, the beast that was its imposition of a ceremony or ceremonies, through which Catholics, often under pain of penalties, were required to worship false gods and deny the first commandment. Of course, some rejected the empire's requirement, as they should have. They maintained the true faith of Christ, despite the consequences. However, multitudes did give in and accept Rome's idolatry and worship of false gods. In the process, they denied the first commandment and apostatized from the faith of Christ. And keep in mind that the empire's imposition of idolatry was often intertwined with the requirement to honor the Roman king and his image. That was a key feature of the beast that was. And even though Roman emperors were technically speaking emperors rather than kings, they were in reality kings. See, for example, John 19:15, where Tiberius Caesar, the Roman emperor at the time, is referred to as a king. There we read that people who called for Christ's crucifixion stated, quote, "We have no king but Caesar," end quote. Thus, the honor given to the Roman emperor and his image was honor given to a Roman king. And the pagan Roman Empire often connected its imposition of idolatry and the worship of false gods with the requirement to honor the Roman king and his image. As we will see, in the new version of the pagan Roman Empire, modern-day Europa, the exact same thing has occurred. The beast that was and is not has returned. In Matthew chapter 23, we read that Jesus said the following, quote, "Woe to you blind guides, who say, 'If anyone swears by the temple, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gold of the temple, he is bound by his oath. You blind fools! For which is greater, the gold or the temple that has made the gold sacred? And you say, if anyone swears by the altar, it is nothing. But if anyone swears by the gift that is on the altar, he is bound by his oath. You blind men! For which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it. And whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. And whoever swears by heaven swears by the throne of God and by him who sits upon it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You serpents, you brood of vipers! How will you escape the sentence of hell?" As I will show in this video, the principle explained in this passage provides the key to understanding the full meaning of John Paul II's quote canonization and how it fits into the prophecies in the Apocalypse concerning the beast. First, John Paul II's quote canonization was not a valid act of the papacy because Francis, the man who canonized him, is not a true pope. According to Catholic teaching, Francis is, like the other post-Vatican II claimants to the papacy, a completely heretical non-Catholic anti-pope. Since he's a heretic and therefore outside the Catholic Church, he's ineligible for the papal office. We have proven that without any doubt in our materials. Therefore, in the eyes of true Catholics who accept the papacy and all of Catholic teaching, the canonization of John Paul II has no validity. See our website and material for all the information on that issue. However, for the hundreds of millions of people in the world who claim to be Catholic, follow the Vatican II sect, and wrongly consider Francis to be the Pope, the canonization of John Paul II is not only of the utmost significance, it is spiritually fatal and apocalyptic. Here's why. It's a fact that for decades, John Paul II promoted false ecumenism and religious indifferentism. False ecumenism and religious indifferentism are condemned by the teaching of sacred scripture and the Catholic Church. See, for example, Pope Pius XI's 1928 encyclical Mortalium Animos. Not only did John Paul II fully endorse and promote false ecumenism and religious indifferentism, he actually facilitated and organized the worship of idols and false gods. John Paul II facilitated and organized the worship of idols and false gods by holding prayer events to which he invited the practitioners of various non-Christian and pagan religions. Scripture teaches that the gods of non-Christian and pagan religions are not God, but devils. See Psalm 95:5, 1 Chronicles 16:26, and 1 Corinthians 10:20. Yet John Paul II invited and encouraged the followers of those religions to come to Assisi and conduct their worship of false gods. He even gave them a place to do so. He actually turned former Catholic churches into rooms or temples dedicated to the worship of false gods. The most notorious examples of his facilitation of idolatry were the Assisi World Days of Prayer for Peace. The first Assisi event occurred in 1986, the second one in 2002. But John Paul II actually endorsed and sponsored many similar events. He sponsored similar events in Kyoto 1987, Rome 1988, and Warsaw 1989, to name just a few. For decades, both in word and in deed, John Paul II encouraged the followers of non-Christian and pagan religions to continue in false religions, false worship, and idolatry. In fact, John Paul II officially taught, including in encyclicals, that the worship of other gods, which occurs in non-Christian religions, is good and is the result of divine inspiration and power. Logically, that means that the one who holds divine power in the universe desires people to worship other gods, and therefore that the other gods are true. Indeed, when John Paul II called the Assisi events, he wasn't organizing a food drive at which some idolaters might be present. He wasn't calling for a strategy session for world peace at which some idolaters might show up. No, he called a day of prayer and worship to bring about peace. Efficacious prayer and worship to divine power was the essence and purpose of the event. Consider that deeply. And for prayer and worship that would be heard, that would be efficacious, he called for prayer to other gods, along with the Catholic God. That is a profession of faith that prayer to other gods is efficacious, and consequently that those gods are true gods. Professions of faith can be made in deed as well as in word. So, in addition to inviting heretics of various stripes to the first Assisi event, John Paul II invited Jews and Muslims who reject the Holy Trinity and the divinity of Christ. He also brought Buddhists, Hindus, Zoroastrians, African animists who worship the Great Thumb, among other things, Shinto priests from Japan who worship various false gods, Jains, American Indian pagans, and followers of the Baha'i religion. The followers of the Baha'i religion believe that Krishna, Buddha, and others were messengers of the Divine One, along with Jesus. At the first Assisi event, a statue of Buddha was notoriously placed on the altar at the Church of St. Francis. At the second Assisi meeting in 2002, John Paul II had it arranged in advance that each religion was given a separate room in which to worship its, quote, god or gods. All the crucifixes were removed, and those which could not be removed were covered. The Muslims required a room facing toward Mecca, and John Paul II provided them with one. The Zoroastrians needed a room with a window so that the smoke from the wood chips that they burned to their god could exit through it, and it was given to them. The Jews wanted a room that had never before been blessed. In other words, a room that had never been blessed in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Ghost, and John Paul II provided them with one. The, quote, traditional African religions, including animists and voodooists, received a room for their worship which includes the honoring of snakes and spirits of various kinds. So, it's absolutely true to say, and no honest person can dispute it, that John Paul II became the builder of little temples to false gods. That's a fact. He built temples for the various gods who were worshipped by the various religions at Assisi. He provided them with a place to worship those gods, and he brought the worship of those gods in front of the entire world. Moreover, at Assisi too, John Paul II arranged it so that the representative of each false religion came to the pulpit to give a sermon on world peace and on his or her religion. In the presence of John Paul II, a voodoo high priest came to the pulpit and promoted the voodoo religion. The Hindu representative stated that everyone is God. The representatives of other false religions likewise gave their talks. And what John Paul II organized for Assisi I and II was replicated by Benedict XVI at Assisi III. Therefore, it's absolutely true to say that in addition to being the builder of temples to false gods, John Paul II was a missionary for those gods. He was a missionary for those gods because he provided a worldwide platform on which the followers and worshippers of those gods could bring the message of the gods and the worship of the gods to the world, with a prominence and with a recognition that they never otherwise would have had. Now, to understand what this really means, theologically and apocalyptically, in light of John Paul II's, quote, canonization, in light of the fact that he is now formally considered a saint by hundreds of millions who claim to be Catholic, suppose for a moment that there's a pagan religion which worships a false god, and suppose that within that pagan religion there is a well-known, quote, saint. This particular, quote, saint or hero is honored by the followers of that pagan religion for the reason that he is known for building a temple to the, quote, god. This saint is the famous temple builder. Since he built the temple in which the god is worshipped, honored, and served, he is special to the followers of that religion. He is considered holy. He became a saint because he provided a home for their god. He built the place where their god is worshipped and served. But if he is considered a saint in that religion, merely because he built the temple to the god, then what does that of necessity say about the god for whom the temple is built? It necessarily means that just as the saint who built the temple is holy and sanctified, the god for whom the temple is built is also holy, and even more holy. One flows from the other, directly, logically, inescapably, as Jesus taught. For which is greater, the gift or the altar that makes the gift sacred? So whoever swears by the altar swears by it and by everything on it, and whoever swears by the temple swears by it and by him who dwells in it. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! If the one who built the temple is a saint, that's only because the temple he built is holy. That makes perfect sense. And if the temple is holy, that's only because the one for whom the temple is built is even more holy. Thus, if the builder of the temple is a saint, that's only because the God worshipped in the temple is a true God, with the power to sanctify or make saints of those who serve and worship him. Do you see what this means? It means necessarily that everyone in the world who accepts John Paul II as a saint and knows anything about his life worships false gods. There is no way around it. They consider false gods to be holy and true, possessing the power to sanctify or make saints of those who serve them. They also consider pagan temples where false gods are worshipped to be holy. There is no escape from that conclusion. It flows directly from one, the recognition of John Paul II as sanctus, and two, the indisputable fact that he built temples for the worship of false gods, and that he served false gods. Some might respond by arguing, but I disagree with John Paul II's activity at Assisi and with other religions. I denounce it. I only accept him as a saint for the other things that he did. I don't believe that he was sanctified or made holy when he served other gods, or when he built their temples, or when he brought their worship before the world, or when he called for them to be worshipped at Assisi, or when he taught that their religions are the products of divine work. I believe, rather, that he was sanctified when he worshipped the true God in the Catholic Church. That response fails, however. The person who makes such an argument is still implicated in idolatry and has denied the first commandment. For in that case, the person is stating that true and sanctifying worship of the one true God, the kind of worship needed to become a saint, does not necessarily exclude serving other gods or building their temples. But the very first commandment of the one true God is, "You shall not have strange gods before me. "You shall not serve other gods, and you shall not worship other gods, for I am a jealous God." Exodus chapters 20 and 34. The very first commandment of the one true God tells us that sanctifying worship of Him, the kind of worship needed to become a saint, necessarily excludes as its first and primary condition serving other gods, building their temples, etc. Therefore, someone who professes that John Paul II is a saint professes belief in a, quote, God who does not exclude serving other gods as a requirement for sanctification. And that's not the true God. The person's position is therefore idolatrous. The person professes belief in a false God because the one true God has identified himself as the one who, first and foremost, excludes serving other gods as his condition for sanctification. Hence, to formally acknowledge John Paul II as a saint, or to call him a saint, as the entire world following the Vatican II sect now does, is to profess that false gods have the power to sanctify those who serve them, or that the true, quote, God does not exclude serving other gods. There's no way around it, and such a position is idolatrous. That's why the honor given to John Paul II's image is prophesied in Apocalypse chapter 13. The veneration of the image of the Roman king or head of the beast who is wounded, recovers, and deceives the world, as our video Is the World About to End covers in detail. The veneration of his image figures prominently into the prophecy about the beast and the Antichrist, precisely because the honoring of his image is the instrument and the means through which the entire world following the Vatican II sect has been directly implicated in idolatry and the worship of a false god or gods. Never before in history have so many professing Catholics been so quickly and automatically implicated in idolatry and a rejection of the first commandment. The ramifications of this are mind-boggling. It's why for years we've emphasized that people must not accept the Vatican II anti-popes as true popes, and why we've proven that they are not true popes for X, Y, and Z reasons. In fact, in many ways, our work demonstrating that the post-Vatican II claimants to the papacy are not valid popes, a fact that should be quite obvious in light of anti-Pope Francis's activity, pointed to the period we are in right now. For those who still wrongly consider the Vatican II sect to be the Catholic Church and its leaders to be true popes, are in a spiritually fatal position. They are required to venerate John Paul II as a saint, and that is to deny the first commandment and worship a false god. Indeed, it is precisely through the honor given to John Paul II and his image that the devil has been able to get many so-called conservatives, who never otherwise would have participated in something like Assisi or kissing the Koran, to accept idolatry anyway. By venerating John Paul II as a saint, which is now required under pain of mortal sin for followers of the Vatican II sect, those, quote, conservatives are implicated in Assisi, in kissing the Koran, etc., whether they like it or not. With this in mind, we should be able to see quite clearly how the beast that was, and is not, has returned in its most essential feature and characteristic, that is, the imposition of idolatry and the worship of false gods, and how this has been accomplished through the veneration of the image of the Roman king. And John Paul II, in addition to being an anti-pope, was an actual Roman king or monarch. He was one of the 7 kings of the Vatican city-state, a new monarchy that came into existence in Rome in 1929 with the Lateran Treaty, as our videos Is the World About to End and Francis and the 7 Kings of the Apocalypse explain. So, just as the pagan Roman Empire beast implicated multitudes of Christians in idolatry and the worship of false gods, through the honor given to the Roman king and the associated ceremony, the end times beast out of the sea does exactly the same thing. However, the modern version of the beast manages to implicate people all over the world in idolatry and a rejection of the first commandment in a more diabolically efficient way. That is, through the formal veneration of John Paul II, a man who notoriously served false gods. To better understand the horrifying consequences of this situation, consider the following example. Suppose that a young professing Catholic around the age of 14 or 15 is told that John Paul II is a saint. The young man honors John Paul II's feast day. A short time later, he looks up John Paul II and he learns that John Paul II invited the worshippers of other gods to Assisi, so that they could worship those gods alongside the Catholic God. If he still accepts John Paul II as a saint at that point, even if he doesn't know anything else about the arguments for why John Paul II was a heretic, why the Vatican II sect is not the Catholic Church, how there have been anti-popes in history, how this situation was prophesied, etc., the young man is nevertheless implicated in idolatry. He has denied the first commandment by accepting that one can become holy by serving other gods and building their temples, or that one can be sanctified by, quote, God, despite serving other gods, which means that the God he now believes in is not the one true God. And it doesn't even matter if the young man or anyone else who calls John Paul II a saint never goes to a temple of the false gods and never professes outward belief in those gods. It doesn't make any difference. By simply accepting John Paul II as a saint, the person has denied the first commandment by holding that a person who serves other gods can be sanctified. That's why the honor given to John Paul II's image is foretold in the Apocalypse. It represents the universal imposition of the evils and the idolatry of the Vatican II sect, the Great Harlot, upon its followers, including upon so-called conservatives who otherwise never would have accepted them or blessed them. And it's important to note that if the aforementioned young man had heard that some random so-called Catholic, for whom he had no special respect, organized the followers of other gods to worship those gods, and brought the worship of those gods to the world, in that case the young man might be inclined to question that person's activity or reject him outright as wicked and a false believer. Of course he should do so. However, the fact that serving other gods is now presented to the young man as the activity conducted by John Paul II, a man his, quote, church tells him was holy and is a saint, serves as a powerful enticement to accept John Paul II as holy anyway, and thereby accept that one who serves other gods can be sanctified. That's why this is so devastating and significant. It means that all those, including many, quote, traditionalists, who may have even criticized the Assisi events and John Paul II's religious indifferentism, yet accept him as a saint or even just call him a saint because they accept anti-Pope Francis, are idolaters. They have denied the first commandment. They profess belief in a God who sanctifies those who serve other gods. That's not the true God. These points demonstrate that all those who have obstinately defended the Vatican II anti-popes in the face of the facts are deceivers. Their obstinate adherence to a false position has kept them and others on a direct path to idolatry, and they have now arrived at the destination point. They have served the interests of the devil. They have worked as ministers of Satan and defenders of the Antichrist. These facts show why it's essential to adhere to the true position and widely disseminate the information proving that the Vatican II sect is not the Catholic Church. There are also a few who cling desperately to the counterchurch, but they know they cannot accept the wicked John Paul II as a saint because of what he did in his life. So they have contrived ways to reject the canonization, yet still claim to accept Francis as the Pope, but they are only fooling themselves. Anti-Pope Francis proclaimed the canonization of John Paul II with the fullness of his, quote, authority. The essential formula he used was as solemn as any canonization in history. If Francis holds the papal office, which he definitely doesn't, the canonization of John Paul II would be as authoritative as any in church history. The process he used and the examination he conducted prior to the solemn declaration are irrelevant. God protects the acts of true popes in such matters, regardless of the study the Pope engages in or the process he utilizes, as those who actually believe in papal infallibility know. Therefore, those who say that Francis is the Pope, an absurd position on its face, but reject his canonization of John Paul II, have simply fallen into a schismatic position and denied papal infallibility. They have departed from Catholic teaching and embraced something akin to, quote, Old Catholicism or Eastern Orthodoxy, in a futile attempt to salvage the Great Harlot and the non-papacy of Francis. In the process, they call into question every canonization in church history. Rather than simply accept and defend the truth that the Vatican II claimants to the papacy are anti-popes, they choose to commit mortal sin and deny the protections Jesus Christ gave to his church and the papal office. The only way to reject the canonization of John Paul II, as people must to be saved, is to correctly acknowledge that Francis is not the Pope, but a heretical non-Catholic anti-pope, and that the Vatican II sect is not the Catholic Church. There are others who, in similar desperation, argue that the canonization of John Paul II only means that he repented, or could have repented, of his horrible and wicked activity and then gone to heaven. That claim is also completely false for two reasons. First, since John Paul II consistently promoted false ecumenism, religious indifferentism, and served false gods by his words and deeds in the external forum, according to Catholic teaching, a repudiation of his wicked beliefs and activity would have to be manifested in the external forum for anyone to conclude that he converted from serving false gods. But of course, no such conversion or repudiation of his entire career was ever made in the external forum. In fact, to the contrary, in John Paul II's very last document, his last will and testament, he acknowledges the Rabbi of Rome and the representatives of non-Christian religions whose false gods he served. And of course, he does not repudiate his apostasy or call the unbelievers to convert to the true God in the Catholic faith. It is therefore forbidden, according to Catholic principles, for anyone to conclude that John Paul II converted from the religious indifferentism, service of false gods, etc., that he displayed for decades. Catholic principles forbid anyone to conclude that he is anywhere but in hell. Second, the aforementioned argument is demolished by the fact that a canonization of a saint does not merely mean that the person is in heaven. It also means that during that person's life as a Catholic, he or she manifested heroic virtue and lived a model Catholic life, even if the conversion to the true faith, manifested clearly in the external forum, occurred shortly before a person's martyrdom or death. As Pope Pius XI taught in his December 31st, 1929 encyclical, quote, "The saints have ever been, are, and ever will be, the greatest benefactors of society and perfect models for every class and profession," end quote. It is therefore impossible to divorce the canonization of John Paul II from what he did and taught as antipope. Indeed, the Vatican II sect canonized him precisely for his career as antipope, one that was characterized by wickedness, false ecumenism, religious indifferentism, and the service of false gods. Hence, those who accept John Paul II as a saint reject the first commandment and are implicated in idolatry. People also need to understand that the significance of John Paul II and why he was the Antichrist is not found in the fact that people think about him much or even almost at all. That actually doesn't make any difference. His significance, rather, is that as a result of what he did in his life, to simply accept him as a saint one time is to reject the first commandment and be implicated in idolatry. That's why the Apocalypse says that all those who honor the image of the beast, the one who is wounded and recovers, and die unconverted, will be tortured day and night, forever and ever. They will never have any rest, the Apocalypse says. And it makes sense, for they will have professed belief in a God who sanctifies those who serve false gods, and that's not the true God. Moreover, as proven in our video, quote, St. John Paul II Exposed, John Paul II also claimed to be God, and that corresponds to the prophecies about the beast as well. For in the beast that was the pagan Roman Empire, the Roman king claimed to be Dominus et Deus, Lord and God. John Paul II did the same. That's a fact. But the truth covered on that issue is frankly over the heads of most people. No matter how clearly and thoroughly it has been proven that John Paul II actually preached that the Son of God became every man in the Incarnation, and that he is therefore Jesus Christ, the Son of God, most people simply lack the grace and the honesty to recognize what John Paul II taught in that regard. Even though few recognize the truth that John Paul II actually taught that he is Jesus Christ throughout his entire anti-papacy, it makes perfect sense that the one who does fulfill the prophecies about the Antichrist and implicates so many in idolatry also claimed to be God himself. It's also remarkable that through the veneration of his image and the quote canonization, John Paul II is doing as much or even more damage to souls now as he did during his life. The fact that John Paul II was the Antichrist also fits precisely with the prophecies concerning the 7 Roman kings, one of whom is wounded seemingly unto death but recovers, and the beast out of the sea, that is, the European Union, arising during the reign of the 6th king when 5 are fallen. That's covered in detail in our video Is the World About to End? And the video Francis and the 7 Kings of the Apocalypse. With these facts in mind, we should be able to see clearly why the explanation of the Whore of Babylon in Apocalypse 17 is also an explanation of the beast, and why the wonder expressed at the whore is also the wonder expressed at the beast. It's because the Antichrist himself, the Roman king of the beast who is wounded, and then has his image venerated, is one of the antipopes of the Whore of Babylon. And just as the worship of false gods in the pagan Roman Empire beast was intertwined with a requirement to honor the Roman king, in the new version of the beast, there is likewise a ceremony involving the veneration of the image of the Roman king, which is connected with, and indeed the instrument of, a widespread imposition of idolatry. Moreover, the apostasy of the Whore of Babylon is the reason why the godless European Union, the political dimension of the beast out of the sea, was able to form. Hence, the whore sits on top of the beast. Her demonic spiritual leadership and whoredom is the reason a new pagan empire formed in Europe, replacing Christian Europe. Thus, when we look at the actual fulfillment of the prophecy about the beast that was and is not, and the Roman whore who sits on top of it, we can see quite clearly why the angel's explanation of the one was an explanation of the other, and why the wonder expressed at the one was the wonder expressed at the other. And the parallels between the beast that was, the pagan Roman Empire, and the new version, modern-day Europe, become even more interesting. In the beast that was, the pagan Roman Empire, they didn't just impose the worship of false gods and the image of the Roman king. They also required people to honor numerous deceased pagan Roman kings. And in modern-day Europe, the beast out of the sea, the exact same thing is happening. The whore of Babylon has moved to officially venerate the images of various anti-popes of the Vatican II sect. The men who, like John Paul II, also embraced paganism, endorsed evils of various kinds, and served false gods. These were the Roman kings of the Vatican city-state most responsible for the formation of the Vatican II sect, the transformation of Europe, and Europe's return to paganism. That's why anti-Pope John XXIII, the wicked heretic and Freemason who called the Second Vatican Council, was also, quote, canonized, and the veneration of his image imposed. It's why anti-Pope Paul VI, the totally demonic heretic, who promulgated the new Mass, confirmed the evil teachings of Vatican II, and attempted to remove the Catholic Mass from much of the world, is to be, quote, beatified. The new version of the pagan Roman Empire is at work right before our eyes, in which the deceased pagan Roman kings, the anti-popes most responsible for the repaganization of Europe, are being honored along with false gods. The beast that was and is not has returned. The devil wants the images of these various anti-popes, not just John Paul II, to be honored because all of them exemplified wickedness. They all embraced heresy and false religions. They all served false gods. By honoring any of them as sanctified or blessed, one is professing that sanctification comes through wickedness. However, John Paul II's image, the image of the one who was wounded and claimed to be Jesus Christ, is the most significant. It's singled out in the Apocalypse because John Paul II served false gods and built temples for their worship most notoriously, and therefore the veneration of him constitutes the most immediate and direct connection to idolatry for the masses. So, if you think that in the future there will come 7 Roman kings, as part of a new kingdom in Rome, with a new empire on the Mediterranean Sea, constituting a new version of the beast that was, rising when 5 of those kings are fallen, with one of those Roman kings being wounded, deceiving the world, and implicating the masses in idolatry through the veneration of his image, well, you're wrong. That's not coming in the future. It already happened, and we are living through the final stage of it.